And now it's time for a brief moment in hockey history with old-time hockey. During the early years of the NHL's infancy, there were many financiers and entrepreneurs looking to expand into the United States to capitalize on their huge sporting market. Such a financier and sports promoter was Thomas Duggan, who received options for NHL franchises in the United States. He sold one to a Boston grocery magnate named Charles Adams. That team became the Boston Bruins in 1924. Duggan then would arrange to have a team in New York City's Madison Square Garden, but would have to wait for the building to be completed the following year. Duggan was able to sign a roster of players simply because the Hamilton Tigers the year before had been expelled from the league due to the players striking for higher pay. And with that, the Americans embarked on their first season of play in 1925, amassing a dismal record of 12-20. Although they were no success in the win column, they were a success at the box office. So much so that the following season, Madison Square Garden management landed a team of its own, the New York Rangers. A clause in the Americans' lease with the Garden required them to support any bid for the Gardens to acquire an NHL franchise. The Gardens' management had promised the Americans' owners that it would never exercise such an option, and that the Americans would be the only team playing in the arena. However, when the Garden opted to seek its own team, after seeing the attendance numbers and money coming in, the Americans had little choice but to agree. The Americans would continue to struggle, and in the first 10 years of the franchise being active, they would only make the playoffs once in 1929, losing in the first round. It was during the 35-36 season that the Americans seemed to have turned it around. But despite this, the Americans' owner was strapped for money and decided to put his team up for sale. Unfortunately, no buyers came forward and he abandoned the team. It was during that year, however, that under the coaching of player-coach Mervyn Red Dutton, the Americans would make it into the second round of the playoffs. And it would mark the first time in 6 years that the team ever even made the playoffs. The following season, the NHL seized control of the Americans due to the owners' outstanding debts and not being able to pay them off. Player-coach Red Dutton was asked to become the operating head of the franchise in 1937, and would instantly sign Ching Johnson and Hap Day, and acquired goaltender Earl Robertson. These new acquisitions greatly helped the team as they finished the season with a 19-18-11 record and made the playoffs, but ultimately would lose again in the second round. It was during 1939 that Canada would enter the Second World War, and it would see the team's Canadian players leave for military service. An even larger number of players entered the military in 1941, which decimated the roster. The Americans would miss the playoffs that year with the worst record in franchise history of 8-29-11. Dutton had changed the team's name in 1941 to the Brooklyn Americans, hoping that he could build a new arena in Brooklyn, but unfortunately, the team had to remain in Manhattan. It was after 1942. The Americans suspended operations until the war's duration was through, with the promise to reinstate the team and build a new arena in Brooklyn. However, in 1946, the NHL decided to cancel the franchise and list the NHL record as the Americans having retired from the league in 1942. The New York Americans never made it further than the second round of the playoffs. They finished dead last in the league multiple times, but did have Hall of Famers such as Charlie and Lionel Conacher, Red Dutton, Busher Jackson, Roy Waters, Eddie Shaw, and Bullet Joe Simpson play for the team. After the Americans suspended play in 1942, the NHL did not expand its league from 6 teams until 1967. And this has been a brief moment of hockey history.